How you doing? This is Eric Froton live on Saturday morning with my co-host Mike Bainbridge from the CFF site. We are the letter winners, and we're here to discuss all the relevant happenings this Saturday morning in terms of news, DFS, CFF, and sides and player props. So without any further ado, we're going to hit some of the late injury news coming to us this morning. Kayvon Thibodeaux, defensive end, likely top 5 pick in the 2022 NFL draft, is questionable for the big game in Ohio State today. He did make the trip. We just saw on his Instagram that he posted that he is in Columbus. He will dress. It looks like he's at least going to try to play if he made the trip. However, his availability is going to be absolutely imperative on Oregon's chances to beat Ohio State. For instance, last week, Minnesota had 0 hits on C.J. Stroud. If they are not going to get any pressure on the first-year quarterback, I think they're going to be in some serious trouble, since Oregon obviously is going to have to try to score with Ohio State to some extent. Next, JT Daniels has an oblique issue. It has been confirmed that Carson Beck will be starting. The line in relation to that dropped from 35.5 to 22.5 against UAB as a result. Obviously, the betting, if you got it at 35.5 where it opened and it's down to 22.5, you have a pretty nice middle opportunity here. Otherwise, obviously you're going to have to rely on Carson Beck. Hopefully you won't see any Stetson Bennett this week, but you never know. As far as Memphis goes, Grant Gunnell having surgery, expected to miss extended time. Seth Hennigan will start against Arkansas State and will be a premium CFF and DFS matchup where applicable. Hennigan did pretty well last week. I think he threw for over 300 yards in what was a pretty easy spot. But, against Arkansas State, we know they're going to throw. Put it in terms of their air it out offense. You have Trevalance Hunt was excellent last week, had 100 yards and a touchdown. Obviously, Corey Rucker, second-year player, is one of the true emerging wide receivers in college football. So, and Jeff Foreman, who had 300-yard games to end the season last year. So Arkansas State, very powerful. You can see a lot of points in that game. I'm not exactly concerned about having Hennigan in for Gunnell, since we haven't seen much from Gunnell anyways. Lastly, for this set of news, Luke Doty, quarterback, South Carolina, is questionable. However, he hasn't practicing in a limited fashion. That's going to be extremely important because they're playing ECU, who got absolutely ground and pounded on the ground last week by Appalachian State, and is only a 2-point spread. So if Luke Doty is playing instead of grad assistant Zeb Nolan, that is going to have a precipitous difference on that game, since he is an excellent athlete. I mean, one of the top 10 dual-threat quarterbacks out of the 2020 class. I think you can expect to see, serious rushing numbers at the very least out of Mr. Doty if he is able to play. So that's something we definitely want to monitor up into game time. Michael, do you have any thoughts on those 4 pieces of news?
Yeah, just focus on the South Carolina news. I want to know if Luke Doty's gonna play today or not, or if he's going to play in a limited fashion. I know there's an enticing prize picks prop bet of Zeb Nolan over under 17.5 fantasy points. If Luke Doty is playing in a limited fashion, that you're loving that under there for Zeb Nolan. And then obviously Kevin Harris coming back in the backfield. Sounds like he's close to 100% healthy. But it was interesting quotes from the head coach this week that, they love their depth in the backfield, even if Kevin Harris is 100% healthy. So I think he used the quote that he's just not going to kick his guys aside to the curb. So, there's an enticing, is a Quandre White, who rushed for 100 yards and a couple of touchdowns last week. Only 4,900 on DraftKings this week. So he has a favorable matchup against East Carolina.
In addition to Zaquandre Wright, who, as you mentioned, he had over 30 fantasy points last week, even though he did a lot of that late in the game, where he broke a couple of big runs. Marshawn Lloyd, who was a top 5 running back, borderline 4-star last year, sustained a knee injury, which allowed Kevin Harris to emerge. But he's $4,500 on DraftKings. And in a game script that we expect to see plenty of rushing from South Carolina, I think you could see all 3 of those guys, a pretty smooth rotation between the 3, throw in Doty's running ability. And I mean, I think they could rush for over 300 yards this week against ECU, who has a notoriously soft defensive front. Moving on to the next bit of items, you have Chris Ottman-Bell, questionable to play this week for Minnesota. We're not really sure he wants to play, but it's still kind of up in the air. They're playing Miami, Ohio, so they're a 18-point favorite. That's a real big spot for CFF purposes for Mr. Ottman-Bell. Last week, without him, Daniel Jackson had 58 yards, whereas Dylan Wright really emerged, 5 catches, 57 yards, and a touchdown. It looked really nice. Made a couple of good grabs in prime time on that particular game. Next, as we mentioned, C.J. Stroud, reports are that he hurt his shoulder in the second quarter against Minnesota, which hampered some of his progress. He was limited in practice this week. Apparently, he did practice yesterday. I have a Ohio State mole, so to speak, who has said that from inside the team, Stroud is expected to play. They put him at 80 to 85% in terms of his shoulder's health at this point. Whether that is the case or not, we certainly remains to be seen. But it looks like he will be starting against Oregon, and that's really important news. Last piece of news items for this issue: Tay Martin, wide receiver for Oklahoma State, had a great week 1 for the Cowboys. 6 catches, 107 yards, and a touchdown. They didn't do much either against a pretty soft FCS team. They only put up 23 points. So the fact that Tay Martin was so involved in the passing game leads me to believe that he will be the outside receiver taking over for Tylan Wallace this year. Now, he is questionable, according to Oklahoma State beat writer Eli Letterman. They're playing Tulsa, which last year they only beat Tulsa 16-7. So it wasn't exactly an offensive explosion. They do get Spencer Sanders back. He's back off COVID protocol. So Shane Illingworth will not be playing, even though he did throw for 317 yards last week and was a credible passer. We're still going to have the 3-year starter in Spencer Sanders out there. If Martin can't go, that's something you will certainly want to pay attention to, especially for DFS purposes. Obviously, CFF. Jaden Bray, true freshman, in for spring this year, really had a nice game. 2 catches, 52 yards, had a nice long catch down the sidelines, which certainly opened some eyes. Or you could see Bryson Green potentially. One of those 2 freshmen who are really rapidly climbing up the depth chart. I think one of those will probably be the top receiver against Tulsa this week. Mike, do you have any thoughts on any of those 3 issues?
Yeah, how you're completely ignoring Brennan Presley. I mean, he didn't have
He's a slot receiver, Mike. He's a slot. I'm talking outside.
Have the greatest week last week, but he still had 7 targets, okay? And, we had the freshmen coming in with the Green brothers and Jaden Bray. But if Braden Johnson is already confirmed out, okay, so he gets mixed in there in the slot. Tay Martin questionable. I think Brennan Presley is going to be the man in the Oklahoma State wide receiver core. We saw Spencer Sanders favor him in the bowl game last year, so they obviously have a connection there. So Brennan Presley definitely stock up this week.
Could see obviously more targets out of that slot role, of course, for Mr. Presley. But that's why I left him, because the 2 guys are outside receivers and Presley's a slot. But yeah, absolutely, he lit it up in the bowl, which frankly caused him to climb up CFF charts in terms of his rankings. He was right around the top 30 of wide receivers this year heading into the week 1. A couple of just quick bites. UMass quarterback Tyler Lytle, 4-star transfer from Colorado, is out against Boston College. That is bad news for the Minutemen. Hopefully he heals up so we can hit that 1.5 over on season wins that I am so bullish on. Christian Anderson will be taking over the quarterback role for Army, where Tyheer Tyler, last week's starter, is injured. So they'll be playing Western Kentucky. That's an important spot, since we do expect Western Kentucky, as we saw last week with the Houston Baptist offense being rolled in there, they're going to play plenty of snaps, or at least they want to. Obviously, Army's going to want to grind it out, so they have a real dichotomy between those 2 teams. Should be an interesting game. Lastly, E.J. Williams, Clemson, had hand surgery. He is expected to try to play against an FCS opponent this week. Michael, will you please tell me, did I flush my E.J. Williams 3 shares down the toilet this year?
Well, I also trashed Joe Nada last week. So, I mean, we both sunk costs there with the Clemson wide receivers. But, no additional thoughts there. I took BC minus 37.5. Tyler Lytle being out only helps the cause.
Only helps the cause. Well, hopefully Mr. Williams can get back and at least try to help my squad this year and my C2C for going forward. We're going to move on to sides now. A couple of the better plays that I like for this year. We already talked a little bit about South Carolina against ECU. I love South Carolina here, -2. It almost looks like a mistake. The Gamecocks ran 47 times last game, 258 yards, 5.5 yards per carry, behind an offensive line that returns 4 starters and 8 players with starting experience, while boasting the 15th most talented 2 deep in the nation. This is an excellent line and obviously a well-formed running attack where Kevin Harris, who was returning, led the SEC in rushing last year. For ECU, they were gashed by Appalachian State, as we mentioned. 36 carries, 226 yards, 6.3 yards per carry, and 2 touchdowns last week in a 33-19 loss that frankly wasn't even that close. As Mike, I think, pointed out in his write-up, C.J. Johnson caught a Hail Mary at the end of the half, and then they basically punched in another one late in the fourth quarter. There really wasn't much happening for ECU on offense. When you're talking about ECU has allowed over 200 yards rushing and 5 yards per carry in each of the last 2 seasons, I just think it's going to be an absolute road grader situation for South Carolina. They're going to maul them, especially if Doty's in there. I think this is a double-digit win and a great spot. Michael, side.
I like Michigan, Washington under. Michigan without their best receiver now with Ronnie Bell out for the season. Washington couldn't do a lick on offense last week. They ran for, I believe, like 65 yards against a very undersized Montana Grizzlies front seven. And that was a surprise because Washington brought back all 5 starters along their offensive line, so they couldn't generate anything via the run. Dylan Morris threw 3 interceptions, so no difference there from the years past. I think we know what to expect out of him. And just injuries, all across the board for Washington wide receivers. So I'm not sure how they're going to be able to generate many points against Michigan this week. So, yeah, give me the under there.
Understood. Washington wants to run the ball. They only gained 65 yards on 27 carries against Montana. Dylan Morris threw 46 passes. Things are not going right for a Jimmy Lake coach team when 46 balls are being put in the air against an FCS team.
The only way this goes over is if Dylan Morris and Cade McNamara just start trading pick sixes back and forth. That's the only way this goes over. Which, admittedly, is possible. So
we do have an elite secondary in that Washington team. It wasn't the defense that was the problem last week. It was the offense. As you mentioned, Dylan Morris, 3 interceptions, including they had a chance on the final drive to make a run and be able to make it. It was a 1-score game, 13-7. They're marching down the field. They're past the half yard marker. Anyways, Dylan Morris stares down Cade Otton, who appeared to be the only guy he really trusted in that entire game. He had about 4 seconds to throw the ball, stares him down, and throws a pick directly in the chest of a dropping zone linebacker for Montana to end the game. It was a horrible ending to a pathetic performance. So can't blame you on the under there. Neither of these teams really look particularly proficient in scoring, though. In Michigan's defense, they did put up 47 points against Western Michigan, who is the little brother who's 5 years older, and you're playing one-on-one when you're 15 and they're 10 is kind of what that game looked like. So moving on to my next game, I happen to like Texas -7 over Arkansas. If you watched that Arkansas-Rice game last week, which I did in its entirety, we personally assure you that was an ugly game. Somehow Arkansas covered the 19 points, but it was a tie ball game, 14-14 going into the fourth quarter. Tie.
And somehow they managed to go over on my under prediction.
Somehow it went over, Mike. I don't know how that happened last week, but you're right. It was a logical play, but the way it went over is, in terms of the game script, Arkansas was not doing much in terms of throwing the ball at all. KJ Jefferson, 12 of 21, 128 yards, 6.1 yards per attempt. Gross. They were undisciplined. They had 13 penalties, 117 yards against Rice. That's not going to fly against Texas. 3 of 11 and third down conversions. They benefited from 3 turnovers, by Rice when they had to air it out because they couldn't run the ball in Arkansas. They made mistakes. But this is an Arkansas defense. They only had 14 sacks in 10 games last season. They allowed 35 points per game. All right. In terms of offensive talent themselves, they're 67th overall in terms of their offensive talent rating, according to 247 in Rivals. That's just not going to cut it against a Texas team where looked great against the number 23 ranked Louisiana Raging Cajuns last week. This is a Billy Napier-led team that can run the ball. It's what they do. It's their identity. Texas's front did an excellent job. Only 76 yards on 29 carries, 2.6 yards per carry last week. I mean, just a devastating front. ULL couldn't do anything. They had to throw the ball 40 times, which, if you know anything about ULL, much like Washington, they don't want to throw the ball 40 times. They don't want any part of that. All right, 282 yards, 0 interceptions, but, it just simply isn't part of their game plan. Arkansas was forced to rely on the run last week. Rushed 44 times, 245 yards, 4 touchdowns. I mean, in terms of KJ Jefferson, rushed 9 times for 89 yards, 2 touchdowns. Much of that was out of structure. A lot of that was simply he dropped back, didn't see anything, and pulled the ball down and managed to make some, lower-level Rice defenders miss and look good. You're not going to be able to do that against Texas this week. They're going to have to throw the ball. You're going to have to put the ball in the air for more than just 128 yards like they did last week. I see Texas really being a problem. If they get up on Arkansas, which I don't think they're going to have a problem scoring Steve Sarkisian's, the talent level we're looking at. I don't think Arkansas is going to have a real hard time coming from behind and throwing against this Texas front. I think that's a bad spot. I'm going Texas big in my sides. Any thoughts on that particular game, Mike?
No, I like the point you made about Texas stopping the Louisiana run game, and that's an offensive line that has 5 returning starters, so it's an experienced group, and Texas was able to control the line of scrimmage, so that bodes well for them. And the only concern I would have in that is it sounds like Treylon Burks is nearing 100% health. I don't think he was there last week, so that could help KJ Jefferson in the passing game, but I'm with you. Longhorns by over 7.
Absolutely. CFP Winning Edge, which is an excellent publication and Patreon. He's actually took over for Billy Connolly from Athlon Sports, which Mike is a writer for. CFP Winning Edge has it as -14 in favor of Texas. So they absolutely think this is off by a line in terms of touchdown. I agree. So, I think that's a pretty darn good side spot for anybody out there looking for an edge. We're going to move on to the DFS portion of the events here. In terms of 2 of my favorite core plays for the main slate, Isaiah Spiller, $6,700. We saw Texas A&M just run all over an inferior opponent last week. They're in a great spot here. I think that it's going to be much of the same against Colorado, where they're going to want to play methodically. They're not going to want to have a shoot-it-out type of a situation with Texas A&M. And I see them getting bowled over by just an experienced front. They're breaking in a new quarterback in Haynes King, and with Spiller, A-Chain as a change of pace. I believe his prize picks is up around 108.5. That's a pretty high line. It's one of the highest running back lines I think we're going to see in terms of the prop situation. I think that's a great spot at a reasonable price at $6,700. Also, for a wide receiver play, I like Garrett Wilson at $5,900. He's going to be pretty chalk, though. I mean, he kind of literally jumps off the screen when you're looking at him there compared to some of the other values. So while he's going to be obviously pretty heavily used, that's going to be a spot where it's Oregon. They're going to have to throw. It's going to be a competitive game, so we think. That's a really good spot for Mr. Wilson. Mike, who are your 2 core plays for the main slate?
Just combining the 2 is the Penn State passing game. Ball State, their Penn State's opponent this week, allowed 367 passing yards last week to Western Illinois. Okay, their wide receiver 1, Dennis Houston, had 12 receptions for 237 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jahan Dotson saw that this past week. I think him and Sean Clifford will get back on track this week. They had some bumps in the road against a very good Wisconsin defense. Not the case with Ball State this week. I think they'll be juiced up by the crowd that hasn't been there in over a year. So I love stacking that Penn State passing game. And you can look to, I think you'll speak on it later, you can look towards the wide receiver 2 and 3 there with Penn State this week as well.
Yeah, in fact, I'll get right on that. I have, in terms of my bargain bin for the main slate, Parker Washington's $4,000. That's a great deal compared to what, if you go and you take a look at what the receivers are that's available. Mike Yurcich's offensive coordinator for Oklahoma State, last year Texas, really likes to take shots down the field, spread them horizontally, beat them deep. I think you're going to see Parker Washington and Jahan Totsman. Absolutely, that passing attack is going to thrive, and they're going to want to really get rolling after that Wisconsin game, which obviously anytime you play the Badgers, it's going to suppress the passing offense. My other favorite bargain bin play, Travion Henderson, $4,300. Ryan Day has said he wants to shorten the rotation. They had 4 running backs getting carries last week, all getting at least 5 or 6, including Marcus Major, who's in at the end. I don't think you're going to see him this week against Oregon. I see, Travion Henderson only got 3 touches, made 95 yards out of it, including a eye-popping 70-yard touchdown reception. You're going to see more work out of him. I see double digits coming. If he gets double digits and cuts into Mayan's workload, which he will, and you already saw in the second half, Master Teague kind of being marginalized and shuffled down the rotation. I think he's going to be taking those snaps. At $4,300, he's going to be a steal. It's the last time you're going to be able to get him at an affordable price. Mike, your bargains.
I like Kendall Milton this week. This isn't a discussion I don't think we've had previously, but Zamir White is the starter, undoubtedly. I think we both would agree that Kendall Milton is the better player. And, and you're going to speak to James Cook later. He's not going to get many reps as a runner in the Georgia offense. I think against an inferior opponent this week in UAB, it's going to be ground and pound. They're not going to have their starting quarterback, I don't believe. Mixed reports. I think
he's out. Regarding reports are he's out from what I heard, but obviously we'll check on game time.
Yeah, with question marks at quarterback, I think it's just going to be a atypical Kirby Smart type of game, defense, ground and pound. I was looking back, and Kendall Milton has not had a game with 8 carries or more, dating back to last year. So it's a little bit of a risk, but for $3,200, can't beat it. I think he finds the end zone at least once, which pays off that salary.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that Kendall Milton, in terms of his projectable talent to the NFL level, I love his talent. He runs with violence, very physical, not afraid to take on tacklers, and I think he gets that 10 reps. I mean, come on, he was a true freshman last year. What are they waiting for? Do you really need to see more out of Zamir White?
No.
As far as any other plays, bargain bins?
Pitt has an athletic tight end in Lucas Krull. He had five targets, 5 receptions for a touchdown last week. This is a system under Mark Whipple, dating back to his time at UMass with Adam Brenneman, loves to favor the tight end. I think he could be the second target in this offense this year behind Jordan Addison. And I do think they'll find success against that Tennessee defense this week, who somehow allowed Matt McDonald, arguably the worst quarterback in college football, to complete 60% of his passes. Okay, so I think Kenny Pickett's gonna thrive this week, and Krull will be on the end of at least 1 touchdown pass.
To quote Tribe Called Quest, Kenny Pickett, yes, he can. Moving on to the evening slate, core 2 plays. I have Tyler Beatty, $4,900. He ran for 215 yards last game. Given they were not playing against the Kentucky defense, but this Kentucky defense only returns 5 players. It's obviously, as we saw from new offensive coordinator Liam Cohen, they're going to throw the ball around a little bit more, which generally means more snaps. For perspective, Chris Rodriguez is listed at $7,800 on the slate, with Beatty only at $4,900 in the same game. Obviously ran for 215 yards. He's put on 15 pounds in the offseason in order to handle the rigors of a starting job. It's only Elijah Young, who's a true freshman, behind him. He's going to get a ton of reps here. I think that's a great deal at, $2,900 less than Chris Rodriguez, who isn't going to catch any passes.
What were they thinking? What were they thinking with this salary? Didn't he rush for 200 yards last week?
Yeah, he did. And C-Rod doesn't catch any passes. Beatty catches a ton of passes. You could have 5 catches. I mean, that's free points in a DFS perspective. Just a great deal. Jordan Whittington is going to be my other core 2 play, $5,300. We saw him being a focal point of Hudson Card. I watched every snap and every pass that Hudson Card threw last week, and I'll tell you, he liked that middle of the field. A couple of short outs to Josh Moore, and he threw a nice flag pattern to Xavier Worthy down the sideline. But most of his work, he really liked to be working that middle of the field. And when Jordan Whittington was afforded the opportunity to make those catches, man, he had a couple of really nice runs, broke some tackles. He had one in particular. He dragged 3 guys for about 15 yards. It was really impressive. If he can stay healthy, Jordan Whittington could really be a breakout performer this year. Mike, who are your 2 core plays?
Bijan Robinson, core play each and every week. He's going to get 20 to 25 touches, as we saw last week. It's going to happen every week. He's a lock for me almost every week. And then Jo'quavious Marks, the Mississippi State running back, I think he provides you with the highest floor of any player in a PPR format like DraftKings. So, he was second on the team in targets as a running back last year. And then he led the team in targets a week ago, found the end zone 3 times. I just think he provides you with that floor where you can just surround him with other high upside pieces.
What's also nice about Jo'quavious is he was splitting time a little bit with Dylan Wright a little bit last year. However, this past game, nope, he was clearly the lead guy in terms of like snap percentage. I want to say he's probably like 85-90% of the snaps. You start seeing that in a pay-per-view, a point per reception format. I guess I was thinking about one of the Conor McGregor fights recently. When you see that in PPR format, it's just free points from that Mike Leach system. And obviously Bijan Robinson is Bijan Robinson. Bargain bin. Mookie Cooper apparently is listed as probable. He's expected to play against Kentucky. There's another underpriced Missouri player where Connor Bazelak, he's certainly capable of throwing 260, 270 yards. They're going to throw a little bit. I'm not worried about in terms of the volume. If he's healthy, he came over and he lit up the spring, had obviously everything they were talking about in camp. Expect Mookie Cooper, who was a top 15 wide receiver recruit last year at Ohio State, one of the many great Ohio State receivers. There's only so many spots, so he opted to transfer. At a minimum price of $3,000, he's a smoking value considering he is going to be the wide receiver 1 there by almost all accounts. On a cheaper front, Jamire Calvin for Washington State. Mississippi State. Jamire Calvin, $3,500. He is a starting inside receiver there. So when you're dealing with that sort of a passing offense on a week-to-week basis, it's kind of hard to see who's going to do what. But he did get a pretty nice share of targets last week against a tough NC State team where they're probably going to be trailing at some point, going to have to be throwing probably even more than usual. They're not going to be able to run the ball. They're going to have to go with it. Jamire Calvin at $3,500 is a smoking deal. I also like Will Mallory at $3,500, where Miami's going to want to look to reestablish themselves after getting absolutely crucified by Alabama last week. They're playing Appalachian State. I see him being a more heavy part of the offensive game plan this week. Mike, your 2 bargains for the night slate.
Yeah, I mentioned this guy last week, Makai Polk. Came through for us with 10 receptions on 10 targets. He only had an average depth of target of 2 yards, so he's not stretching the field by any means. But, he's going to get those consistent targets on a weekly basis. And as we saw last week, and, at $3,700, he provides you, again, similar to all of these Mississippi State guys, he really provides you a high floor that he can really hit that salary fairly easily. Next guy, we're going to have to monitor this one for the night slate. Taj Davis for Washington. The Huskies were without their top 3 receivers last week. It sounds like 2 of them potentially will be back this week. But I think Taj Davis will still be part of that starting lineup if that's the case. And he was second on the team last week with 10 targets and 6 receptions. So he could easily pay off that min salary pricing.
Certainly. I plan on touching on Taj Davis here at the end as well. We're going to move on to the props for BETSPERTS. Just so you know, BETSPERTS is running a promo where if you get in and you sign up, you can put a Pat Mahomes over 0.5 yards passing. Free play tomorrow. That's as easy as it gets, people. Patrick Mahomes, 0.5 yards. So if you want to go over to Prize Picks, promo code is BETSPERTS, BETSPERTS, for that Pat Mahomes play. On BETSPERTS, I have a few different props. I'm going to go with Taylor Powell, 214.5 passing yards over. As anybody knows, with the Troy passing offense, they throw the ball often, all game long, and that's what they do. Several 300-yard passing games last year. I want to say most of the games went over 300 yards. You're talking about 214.5 against Liberty, a team that didn't quite look as invincible last week as they had previously. Taylor Powell, again, a Power 5 quarterback transferring down, all about it. James Cook, for the second week in a row, we're going to run it back with James Cook. Somehow, at 42.5 yards last week, he didn't eclipse that mark. 5 carries, 19 yards, 4 receptions. He's basically a passing down back. Somehow where he doesn't hit 42.5, they actually decided to raise it to 54.5 for his over-under. Under all day, you got Kendall Milton, you got Kenny McIntosh, and you got obviously Zamir White there. It's a crowd backfield. He's the passing down back. Give me James Cook again, and I'm going to keep betting it if they keep putting it there. Charles Williams, UNLV against Arizona State. 78.5 rushing yards is the over-under. I'm going heavy under here because he got a lot of reps, 22 reps last week. However, they were playing a FCS team, and they lost 35-33 against an FCS team. Okay, you're going up against one of the class of the Pac-12. You have 11 starters. Antonio Pierce's defense. That's a bad spot for a UNLV team that is constantly retooling. Give me the under hard on that. Mike, what do you like for prize picks?
I got over on Joe Milton, 175.5. Pittsburgh is not going to allow Tennessee to run the football. They're already down a running back, I believe, this week. Tennessee is. So they're going to have to sling it around in Josh Heupel's offense this week. 18.2 yards average per depth of pass for Joe Milton last week. So really, he only completed 50% of his passes, but we only need him to hit a few long ones there. I think he easily surpasses that 175.5 mark. Secondly, Rashaad White for Arizona State. I like him over 79.5 rushing yards. We have questionable backups in the Arizona State backfield with Trey Annam and Daniel Nada, both nicked up, questionable to play. Rashaad White, another big play back, averaged 10 yards a carry last year, easily could hit that over UNLV.
Certainly. And a couple of late breaking prop bets from this morning that I kind of liked. On PointsBet, Cornelius Johnson is at 60.5. Last week, played 42 of 60 snaps. Only got 2 receptions for 15 yards last game. We saw Ronnie Bell catch a deep one for 76. We also saw Dylan Wright catch a deep one as well. So when it comes to Cornelius Johnson, he appears to be more on the possession receiver front. Only got 2 targets, only two recs, where he's at 60.5 this week against a very good top 15, I would say, Washington secondary that if there's anything they can do, they can defend the pass at the very least. With Mike liking the under, I agree as well. It's going to be a slowly paced game. And Cornelius Johnson at 60.5, I think that's a great underplay. Lastly, DraftKings, we talked about Taj Davis a little bit. 58.5 yards is his over and under. Roma Duns, Jalen McMillan, Terrell Bynum, and now Jalen Polk, who got injured last week. Polk won't be playing. But those 4 guys who were starting wide receivers, all of them very questionable play. We don't know if any of them are going to play. I would say keep an eye on it. Last week, Taj Davis, 10 targets, 6 receptions, 59 yards. And that was against Montana. We're playing against Michigan here. If either of those two, if 2 of those guys play, I think it's enough to push Taj Davis down the depth chart enough where you want to pay attention and see what the late breaking news is and make that underplay. But I would want to check to see who's playing and when. So that's going to do it for letter winners this morning. I am Eric Froton, CF Froton, and NBC Sports Edge. You'll see my props columns, DFS columns, all my work there. And for Mike Bainbridge, please lead us out, Mr. Bainbridge.
Yes, you can find me at Mike M. Bainbridge, CFF. Jump on the Discord at the CFF site. We'll be posting all the news in the next hour leading up to kickoff. Excellent.
And speaking of the Discord channel, Joey, TTU, we're sorry, Joey, that we didn't listen to you on Taj Brooks last week. Should have went with him instead of Xavier White when Sir Roderick Thompson was out. So the Discord wins again. Props. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.